Good afternoon. My name is Josh Altman, and I'm the Speakers Director of the William F. Buckley Jr. Program. The second panel this afternoon will address the state of free expression and intellectual diversity in higher education. The timeliness of this panel cannot be overstated. Today, the Yale community is in the midst of a critically important discussion about race on campus, providing students and administrators an opportunity to reflect upon these sorts of relationships. The administration has largely promoted the free expression of ideas and experiences so as to create a supportive network for women of color and African American students and other minority students on campus. Yet, the campus discussions are too often punctuated with aggressive student disdain toward the slightest opposition, ad hominem attacks against well-intentioned administrators, and the recent assertion that there is only one valid point of view and that this view takes precedence over free speech. It is my hope that this panel will allow us to meditate further on this current topic that the Yale community needs to address. I'm here to introduce the moderator of our second panel. Professor Noël Valis teaches at Yale University, and her research focuses on modern Spanish literature, culture, and history. She's a Guggenheim and National Endowment for the Humanities Fellow, the author of 25 books, including Teaching Representations of the Spanish Civil War, Sacred Realism, Religion and the Imagination in Modern Spanish, a translation of Noni Benegas's poetry, which won the New England Council of Latin American Studies Best Book Translation Prize, a book of poetry called My House Remembers Me, and a novella, The Labor of Longing. Professor Valis has served on the board of 28 publications, and her current project is a book titled Lorca After Life. She and Carol Mayer recently published a translation titled Two Confessions, Essays by Maria Zambrona and Rosa Chassel. She's also a corresponding member of the North American Academy of Spanish Language. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming our moderator for the second panel, Professor Noël Valis.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Can you hear me back there? Yeah, yay! At least something is working here with the technology. Welcome to the second panel of the Conference on the Future of Free Speech. The panel is on the state of free expression and intellectual diversity in higher education, with participants Greg Lukianoff and Neal and James Piereson. We'll hear from them first, and afterward open up the floor to further discussion. There's a line from the Aeneid, hic opus hic labor est, when the Sibyl tells Aeneas, it is easy to go below, in order to speak to the shade of his father in the lower world, but to climb again, she says, to trace the footsteps back to the air above. There lies the task, the toil. Virgil was, of course, speaking about escaping death. But on a less final note, and by metaphorical extension, the American campus, too, finds itself gasping for air, suffocating under the weight of lifeless thought and dead language. I was about to use another classical image, the Herculean task of cleaning the Augean stables, before realizing that I had stepped into the muck of a perfect microaggression. But as you see, I have kindly provided a trigger warning to ward off the offense of bad omens, universally known to produce trauma and other auguries nowadays cataloged under the name Henny Penny, or the sky is falling, the sky is falling. I hasten to beg forgiveness lest my mixed metaphors provoke even more distress. Yet, the more I think about trigger warnings, the more offended I feel. I am deeply offended that students have trigger warnings. Aren't professors, too, worthy of having trigger warnings? Shouldn't we be protected from the emotional stress of, say, reading student papers? Shouldn't we be given warnings that we are about to be pummeled by dangling qualifiers, non sequiturs, run-on sentences, and heaven forgive us, logic-free sentences? If I stress language, it is because language is the heart of the matter here. George Orwell wrote that if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought. Debased language has an effect on the free circulation of speech. Orwell understood that restricting meaning restricted free speech, and hence freedom itself. In 1984, that is the novel, he writes, even the youngest children are taught something called Crime Stop. Crime Stop, he says, means the faculty of stopping short, as though by instinct, at the threshold of any dangerous thought. It includes the power of not grasping analogies, of failing to perceive logical errors, of misunderstanding the simplest arguments, and of being bored or repelled by any train of thought which is capable of leading in a heretical direction. Crime Stop, in short, means protective stupidity. Now, can you imagine how George Orwell would fare on American campuses today, after having said that? Crime Stop is the equivalent of safe spaces on American campuses. In one of the most thoughtful pieces pertinent to the subject of this conference, The Coddling of the American Mind, Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt maintain a distinction between the earlier movement of political correctness restricting speech and the current one centered on emotional well-being with the goal of protecting students from psychological harm. But how can you separate the two when the ultimate effect of such protectiveness is to produce not simply the policing of language, but of thought itself? A recent example of such misdirected concern at Yale is the master of Piereson College's rejection of his own title, thereby ignoring the panoply of meanings, not to mention the importance of context, attached to the word. Talk about master narratives. Here too, sorry, couldn't resist that. Here too, Orwell is prescient, observing that Newspeak operated, he said, by eliminating undesirable words and by stripping such words as remained of unorthodox meanings and so far as possible of all secondary meanings whatever. This protectiveness is also vindictive, attacking all perceived transgressors of political correctness, as Lukianoff and Haidt observe. Ours is a culture of the aggrieved, or as Peter Wood puts it, I resent, therefore I am. I wish I could steal that. I have, haven't I? Yes. No, it is Peter Wood. In this latest version of American Puritanism, the self-righteous are the new conformists, the occupiers of virtue, having already ascertained what virtue is by simple decree. Perpetually in panic mode over a self-created problem, they are also, it appears, completely humorless. Free speech and the ability to gently or not poke fun at ourselves are intimately connected. I mean, we're the country of Mark Twain, right? Will Rogers. On that last point, and before presenting our distinguished panel, I turn to Meredith Willson's witty yet affectionate take on small-town conformism, The Music Man. The Music Man is a classic con artist who tells the good people of River City they've got a problem that doesn't exist. And to solve that problem, the temptations of modern society in the form of a pool hall, they need to buy musical instruments for their children. And I'll leave you to draw any parallels or any analogies here between this and the topic at hand today. And I hope Robert Preston will forgive me wherever he is. Mothers of River City, he says, heed that warning before it's too late. Watch for the telltale sign of corruption. The minute your son leaves the house, does he rebuckle his knickerbockers below the knee? Is there a nicotine stain on his index finger? A dime novel hidden in the corn crib? Is he starting to memorize jokes from Captain Billy's whiz-bang? Are certain words creeping into his conversation? Words like swell, and so's your old man. Well, if so, my friends, you got trouble right here in River City with a capital T that rhymes with P and that stands for pool. We've surely got trouble right here in River City. Remember the Maine, Plymouth Rock, and the Golden Rule. Oh, we've got trouble. We're in terrible, terrible trouble. That game with the 15 numbered balls is a devil's tool. Oh, yes, we got trouble, trouble, trouble. With a T, got to rhyme it with P, and that stands for pool. So there you have it. I mean, we don't have to say any more, right? A manufactured crisis that benefits precisely the people who manufactured it. And don't forget, the Music Man is a professor, Professor Harold Hill. Now for the pleasure of presenting our panelists. Greg Lukianoff is an attorney and the president and CEO of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, FIRE. and he has authored Unlearning Liberty, Campus Censorship and the End of American Debate, and Freedom from Speech. He publishes all over the place. He's a regular columnist for the Huffington Post. And in 2008, he became the first ever recipient of the Playboy Foundation Freedom of Expression Award, and I think that's the first time I've ever used Playboy in public. And in 2010, he received Ford Hall Forum's Louis P. and Evelyn Smith First Amendment Award on behalf of FIRE. And Neal co-founded the American Council of Trustees and Alumni and has been president since 2003. For over 15 years, she's been a prominent national player in higher education reform. And she too has appeared in many places on radio and television and in columns. And she has appeared contributing chapters to Reforming the Politically Correct University, another book, Accountability in American Higher Education, and Intellectual Property Rights and Capital Formation in the Next Decade. She's currently completing a book on the college selection process, What's a Parent to Do? And she graduated from Harvard College and received her JD from Harvard Law School, and where she was the first woman president of the Harvard Journal on Legislation. James Piereson is president of the William E. Simon Foundation, a private grant-making foundation with broad charitable interests in the fields of education, religion, and problems of youth. He's also a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, where he's chairman of the selection committee for the Veritas Fund, which allocates grants to programs on college and university campuses. He was also executive director and trustee of the John M. Olin Foundation, and a faculty member before that at Iowa State, Indiana University, and the University of Pennsylvania. He's the author of Camelot and the Cultural Revolution, How the Assassination of John F. Kennedy Shattered American Liberalism, and Shattered Consensus, The Rise and Decline of America's Post-War Political Order. And so, without any more, I am now turning this over to this wonderful panel.
So I think I'm up first. Can you all hear me? Excellent. Okay, so yeah, there's trouble in River City. And I gotta tell you, I had remarks prepared, but I just want to explain my personal experience on Yale just in the past 2 days. So I have a couple of preliminary questions first. How many here have heard of FIRE? Most of you, okay. So the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education is a leading defender of free speech and due process and academic freedom on college campuses. We were founded in 1999 by Alan Charles Kors and Harvey Silverglade. How many people know about what's going on at Silliman House? Okay, college. Yeah, anyway. So, okay, I'm gonna fill you in. Erica Christakis, who has actually been a very brave, and she's the wife of the person who introduced us today, Nick Christakis, is a very brave woman. When she was at Harvard, she wrote things about people going too far when it came to overgeneralizing when it came to sexual assault. She had the bravery of inviting me up to give a speech on freedom of speech to her students there. She's been a consistent culture critic who always tries to be to bend over backwards to be exceedingly fair to the other side. She wrote an email to her students. She's a master at Silliman. She wrote she wrote an email saying that a previous email that had been sent out about don't dress inappropriately for Halloween was a little bit over the top and a little bit silly. And she made the point in very, in my opinion, mild language saying, well, you know, isn't Halloween a time to be transgressive? Isn't a Halloween time to be creative? You would think, given the reaction to what she had written, that she had actually wiped out an Indian village. It was absolutely amazing. And so I was here I came in yesterday just for this pre-planned talk to Nick Christakis' group. And I can compare it only to 2 other times in my life that I've seen something this intense, that I've been there for. One, when I was actually on a campus at NYU defending the right to show the Muhammad cartoons, and the Muslim Student Association there was, you know, there was this one big dude in front, like, doing, like, this thing to me, you know? I was like, whoa, okay. And in that case, we actually did need security present. Another time was when I covered the University of Delaware case, and I went to actually University of Delaware to explain why their program was so nuts. I can't explain the University of Delaware program in any fewer than 50,000 words, so please read my book on learning liberty, but it was insane. And this is all, so this is all 2007 and before. I have never seen such an emotional display from students. And again, this was over an email about, hey, can we chill out a little bit about Halloween? I'm sorry?
Well, then you're going to have to, pick me up and carry me. Just do what you have to do.
Okay.
We don't care if he puts the posters up.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead.
Burning Indian villages, and I can toast my side.
Yeah, totally post the signs. Okay. So I watched this last night.
You people speak like you don't know the history of the country that you pretend to love.
This is
And
amazing.
you talk about burning Indian
This-
villages, which gets a lot of
I said, this is amazing. I'm saying that they're treating someone for making a mild criticism as if this was a war crime. This is amazing.
I would not have taken him out. But
This is absolutely amazing.
as long as it doesn't disrupt the proceedings.
So, okay, so I think that just made my point. So yesterday, when Nick Christakis went out to defend this, relatively, I'm sorry, tame email, it turned into, dozens and dozens of students shouting at him. And he managed to, in my opinion, maintain his composure. We just posted something at thefire.org about this incident yesterday. I actually took video myself about it. And I gotta tell you, if you guys are Yaleys or if you're alums, they're gonna try to fire Nick Christakis. There's already a move. No, and I'm saying this is a prediction, to be clear, but there already is a move to get him fired. And as you can see from the passion just displayed, they really do think that him and his wife need to go. And I need you, as Yale alumni, to go to thefire.org, read the article that explains the entire situation, and come to the defense of free speech at Yale. So, yeah, there's a question from, yeah.
It's not a question, but those of us that didn't raise your hand, we've been here all day, heard about, I have no idea what you're talking about.
Okay.
What is the Silliman incident? 10 seconds?
I did actually just describe it.
That she wrote an email?
Yeah, that's it. That's the incident. I know it's confusing. Yeah, so go to thefire.org, read up on it. So even strong imagery talking about people overreacting was apparently much too much. So anyway, I've written a couple books. I wrote one on learning liberty that was primarily about sort of First Amendment issues on campus. I wrote a book called Freedom from Speech, both of which I published with Encounter, only about a year and a half ago. And that was about how I think that increasingly students are demanding freedom from speech. And I wrote The Coddling of the American Mind, which, by the way, got yelled a lot yesterday during the confrontation with, it's like, who's being coddled? And I'm like, wow, okay, I hope they don't recognize me during this whole incident. And we have created a, and it was everything that I've been talking about lately. I absolutely, I'm a First Amendment lawyer. I believe in the strongest protections of freedom of speech, freedom of opinion. But freedom of speech doesn't mean very much if we're not bothering to listen to each other. So I had a talk yesterday at Silliman afterwards. I was invited just coincidentally to give a talk about what's going on. And and I just emphasized the fact that it's like, people, you're not even listening to each other. Like the epistemic arrogance of just assuming that you already know everything that you need to know about the world, and that if someone says something slightly out of line, and what was even slightly out of line? I mean, all of you, you have to go read what Erica Christakis actually wrote. And again, there is a move to get her kicked out. Yesterday, during this confrontation, there was a student who yelled at, who called the professor, disgusting. How can he sleep at night? And the only thing that he could do, he tried to apologize for if he caused hurt, but he wasn't willing to say what he actually said was wrong. And it seemed like the only thing he could have done was beg for forgiveness. And I have to tell you, from defending free speech on campus for 2001, if he had actually gone so far as to beg for forgiveness, they would have taken that as an admission of guilt and a reason for also terminating him. So I want to be very clear. I've been doing this for a long time. For most of my career, what I've been most worried about has been administrators being out of control. And students were the ones who comparatively had their heads on their shoulders compared to the administrators. In the past 4 years, I've been the most concerned about the Department of Education making all of this a lot worse by coming up with impossible harassment standards that include speech that merely offends. But this is the worst I have ever seen it. I thought it was getting better for a couple of years there. I thought that some amount of common sense was sort of returning. But when you have a situation where, and this is happening at Wesleyan, where someone wrote a piece critical of the Black Lives Matter movement that would have been easily acceptable by USA Today, nothing particularly radical, students got together and proudly declared that one, the newspaper needed to be defunded, and that they would recycle copies of the student newspaper in the meantime. In other words, mass throw them out. And what's happened at Wesleyan? They've cut the funding of the newspaper, of the Argus, by $15,000. So right now, yeah, normally I'm trying to be fair and reasonable. There's a crisis going on this year. There's a crisis going on at Yale, and they need your help. We need your help, because if campuses become a situation where you can't say a single provocative thing without leading to demands that someone be fired, it's over for the marketplace of ideas on campus.
With that happy note, I'm inclined just to engage in some cheap Harvard-Yale jokes. I think maybe that's what we really need to engage in. Well, I certainly will not disagree with Greg that there is a problem in academe. And I do want to explore that, but I also want to present to you that there are some signs of hope, and you who are alumni and you who are engaged with the university can be a way to make a change. I will give you a trigger warning. My assessment about the state of higher ed free speech will contain traumatic subject matter for those who believe colleges and universities should be fostering the free exchange of ideas, because as we've just heard from Greg, across the country it is true. We are seeing a culture of offense under the banner of academic freedom, and I'm going to use Bill Buckley's terms, the superstitions of academic freedom. Academe, it is true, has declared whole disciplines, entire political perspectives, and influential thinkers off limits. And I would submit, I think just as we've heard before, that this stifling academic culture is doing no one a service. It is hobbling students' intellect and character, and it clearly endangers the empowerment and training of the next generation of leaders. But as I just said, having said that, there is hope. And I think that one of the ways to turn this situation around is to turn to trustees and alumni. And that is why, indeed, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni exists. We were founded back in 1995 to reach out to governing boards and alumni to reverse these trends that occur on campus. It was our contention that most of the threats to free speech, most of the threats to academic standards were from within, and that it was important for outside forces, alumni and trustees, to become engaged with these issues. The crisis of American higher ed would be far deeper were it not for the efforts of people you've been hearing today, the Buckley program, and the reform community, which is working hard to challenge low academic standards and a lack of intellectual diversity. Now, I want to start with something that I think is a very, very positive development. This is a report called Governance for a New Era, and I'm happy to tell you it has a Yale connection. This was chaired by none other than former Yale President Benno Schmidt and it was signed by Yale's own Jose Cabranes and Donald Kagan, to name only a few of its supporters. And this statement, which you can find on the ACTA website, and we have a few copies here, is emphatic in calling on trustees and administrators to take a more active role in reviewing and benchmarking the work of faculty and administrators and what is happening on college campuses. We've heard several times about the risk-averse nature of the modern university. It is indeed, and trustees are going to have to speak up, particularly when it comes to the basic mission of their universities, which is the pursuit of truth. Too many trustees have been defining their role narrowly as boosters, cheerleaders, and donors, and we must insist that they be more than that. In keeping with Buckley's thinking, this report makes clear that trustees are the tie between the university and the greater society. And it does cite one Harvard man, Derek Bach, who stresses, I think, an important point. Trustees are supposed to act as a mediating agent between the interests of the institution and the needs of the surrounding society. And it is for this reason that I think we have to hold the board responsible for the last word when it comes to academic excellence and academic freedom. They have a perspective that tenured professors, that students cannot bring, because they obviously, for professors, they have their own departments and disciplines, and presumably the reason we have students here is because they're here to learn something, not because they're here to teach others. Now, what this report says, and I think it's particularly relevant now given the situation that we've been talking about, is that trustees must intervene when internal constituencies are not doing the right thing. And this should happen rarely, it is true, but it should happen when president, provost, and faculty have not otherwise adequately addressed the matters. Now, there have been some very good signs here at Yale, I think. President Salovey was outspoken in supporting the Buckley program and in refusing to countenance efforts to disinvite Ayaan Hirsi Ali. He also was very good in having a speech to the freshmen that talked about academic freedom, the free speech, I believe last year. So there are some good things that we have seen, but I think more needs to be done. Now, this report says very clearly that trustees need to intervene to oppose disinvitations. They need to intervene to insist on disciplinary diversity, something that we've heard talked about a little bit earlier and with which I fully agree. And the report says that they must intervene when there is evidence that self-interest and personal ideologies drive departmental directions rather than the interest of students and preparation of citizens. And we've all heard that this is a serious problem. What this report calls for, and I think it's worthy of note, is that trustees need to ask annually for a report from the administration on disciplinary diversity. In history, for example, can students learn about military history? Can they learn about the American Revolution? Is the Constitution taught? Basically, start with facts and go from there. Trustees need to demand integrity in the hiring process, and they need to adopt policies that maintain institutional neutrality and distance, something that we heard referenced in a question earlier. The report urges presidents, deans, and faculty to address entering students on academic freedom, and most broadly, that it emphasizes trustees need to ensure that academic freedom is a central value that is focused on regularly on the college campus. Now, just in the last month, the American Council of Trustees and Alumni wrote to 1,100 boards of trustees around the country, urging them to support the free exchange of ideas and intellectual diversity in the context of this culture of offense. This is a top priority for us. It's something we will continue to push, and it's something that FIRE is working on as well. And while it is not speedy, I can tell you that there are boards and presidents that are coming to the table. Chicago, Princeton, Purdue, Johns Hopkins, and very recently the faculty at American University stood up and said to the students that they were not going to use trigger warnings. Now, interestingly, those students then protested that the faculty obviously didn't understand their sensitivities. But it is clear that it has gotten so bad that we are beginning to see a pushback. Now, Yale, and we've heard this in our first session, to its credit, went on record years ago with this remarkable Woodward report. And we have this out in the anteroom, and I hope you'll take a look at it. This is the report excerpted. It has a wonderful gloss by Judge Cabranes and Yale law professor Kate Stiff. And to my mind, this is just about as good as it gets. It is a full-throated endorsement of what academic freedom should be on a college campus. And I hope that we will use this opportunity not only to talk about this report amongst ourselves, but that we will take it upon ourselves to move from this group and to demand that Yale revisit this statement, that there be a university-wide teach-in, and that the university celebrate this profound document, parse this document, build on this document, and understand what it has to say. C. Van Woodward was not only a famous historian, but he was a man of conviction, and he understood that an education of quality will be unsettling and will cause discomfort. And I want to quote from this report because it is so relevant to what's happening outside. To make the fostering of friendship, solidarity, harmony, civility, or mutual respect the primary and dominant value on campus risks sacrificing the university's central purpose, teaching, and scholarship. So I think that from this, I hope we will move on and demand that there be a reaffirmation. I think it would even have been instructive in the context of taking that young man away. In the absence of disruption, I don't even know that he should have been taken away. And this is the kind of criteria that are set out in this report and that the university, adults, students, and faculty need to know and understand. Briefly, I also think that as Yale is now looking at spending $50 million on diversity, that they need to figure out how to bring about intellectual diversity, and that needs to be part of the conversation. And frankly, we can be very happy for Lauren and the other students who have made this wonderful program what we refer to as an oasis of excellence. There are other places in this country that have similar programs. Obviously, it is a watering hole for those of us who want to hear different perspectives, but we need to be talking about this more broadly as a university community. Now, there are other places that I'll just raise briefly that have been taking the kinds of courageous steps that are necessary. City University of New York has put together grievance policies for students so that they can speak out if they feel that they are being aggrieved because of their particular viewpoints. And having read the survey that the Buckley program did, which shows widespread fear of students to disagree in class, I think this is, again, a pressing opportunity for Yale. Trustees at the University of Colorado Boulder undertook a campus climate survey, and there they found a full 23% of students who were intimidated to share their ideas, opinions, and beliefs. So what did that board do? It then adopted policies that prohibit discrimination on the basis of political affiliation and political philosophy. This is progress. It's time for Yale to take a look at it as well. 2015, yes, things are bad, but I think it's much better than last year when we look at disinvitations. We've already seen Miami, Michigan State. They allowed George Will to speak despite vocal student protest. And even at the University of Minnesota, which we talked about, they arrested the students. These are the sorts of things that we need to be able to address and understand, and the Woodward statement talks about it. I don't say all that much positive about my alma mater, but even at Harvard Law, I can say thankfully the professors pushed back when the Harvard administrators adopted a Title IX federal plan with little regard for constitutional protections. So yes, are there problems? Yes, indeed, there are problems out there. But if we're going to solve these problems, we need to engage trustees, alumni, and the full campus community to talk about the issues before us. And the American Council of Trustees and Alumni is here to help. We're here to work with Yale trustees. We're here to work with Yale alums with whom we've written letters in the past. And when it is necessary to name and shame, we will do that as well. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Lauren, for this outstanding program. You've certainly scheduled it at a timely point in the history of Yale University. Certainly the events that have gone on in the past week are new causes for dismay about what's happening on the campus. Now, the very interesting survey that the Buckley program has conducted about student attitudes should be a warning signal to a lot of us. I had long thought that the difficulty on campus was leftist faculty and administrators pushing a point of view, and that the students came to campus with relatively healthy outlooks to push back against this. The Buckley study suggests that there's little grounds for this, that too many students support trigger warnings and that sort of thing, and many students feel intimidated to express their views. So this is a problem that has filtered through the modern academy, is endemic to the modern academy. It's going to be a very difficult one to address and resolve. Now, perhaps the Buckley program has the right approach to this by poking some fun at it. I attended the disinvitation dinner last spring where George Will spoke. That was very well done. It was designed to poke some fun at this idea that we can disinvite speakers from campus because we disagree with what they say. A lot of us would like to be added to that list. It's a distinguished list. In the 1960s, when various trials were being conducted, the left and the subpoenas were being issued, various leftists who didn't get those subpoenas said they had subpoena envy.
Terrible.
But some of us have disinvitation envy now because that's very distinguished company. And of course, as someone pointed out, a lot of the students at whom this is directed could direct it back. I'm insulted that you've called me a racist or a sexist. I need a trigger warning before I read that book, et cetera, et cetera. But it's of course assumed for reasons that Professor Hill has adduced that this is never going to happen because this only works in one direction. Now, on a somewhat more serious note, there's a new view of freedom of speech and free expression is being articulated on the campus and in legal circles and in the law schools. Thomas Jefferson famously said that why should I worry if someone speaks his mind even though it's an error? It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg. Doesn't do me any harm. Let free speech exist as long as reason is free to combat it. The marketplace of ideas that John Stuart Mill wrote about in On Liberty. In any case, speech is not action, it's speech. Let people fight it out over speech. Action is what we need to worry about. The new view is that speech is action. And then if I say something that might offend someone, I've taken an action, even if it's not intended. And therefore, speech can be regulated a lot like action historically has been regulated. This is the new theory. It's a dangerous theory, but it has many proponents in the legal circles, and it's the theory that's being followed on many campuses, and it surrounds this controversy on Yale today. It's something that needs to be fought against. FIRE is doing an admirable job of fighting against it, and it's a great danger to free expression, not only on the campus, but around the country. Now, this problem of expression is also bleeding into other institutions of our society. We saw the Duke case, where that whole issue threatened to corrupt our legal proceedings. And fortunately, it did not, but we could see as this wound itself out how it could possibly do so and might do so in the future. We've heard the argument, and I've heard it many times, that, look, the right suppressed the left in the past, the left is suppressing the right today. What's new? I don't think Bill Buckley was trying to suppress anyone's speech. At Yale, he wrote a book saying that his vision for Yale was different from the one that was being pursued. There was a debate about it, a lively debate in the early 1950s. Bill Buckley lost that debate, as he often said. But he wasn't trying to suppress anyone's speech. He had a different vision of what the university should be. And so that situation was different. And I believe that the situation of free speech is different today than it's been in the past. Now, as a jaded person and a cynical person, I never saw the trigger warning and microaggression issue coming. I couldn't even imagine that that would happen. I thought this is all about arguments about free speech. But of course, you know, we can go back and see this developing. We can recall the Salman Rushdie incident, where he wrote a novel, and we know what happened there. Political correctness developed on the campus exactly at the point when the Soviet Union collapsed. That's kind of a surprise because the idea of political correctness arises out of the far left. We can go back to the 1960s with all the various incidents there on the Cornell campus. The Port Huron statement, issued by the New Left, explicitly said that their goal was to take over the universities and that they could create an archipelago of leftist organizations on campuses throughout the country. This is very deliberately designed by the New Left in the early 1960s. And of course, a lot of this goes back before that. Now I'm going to read from a book that I brought with me. I have it concealed on the table here. Driving up today, Roger Kimball told me that it might be hazardous to show this book on the campus. Of course, it could be any number of books. It could be Huckleberry Finn. A lot of impolite things said, insensitive things said in that book. Could be the New Testament or the Old Testament. Could even be the Quran. The New Testament, of course, the central figure says, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." That's been a long-standing belief in Western civilization. It's been turned on its head. You shall not know the truth because it might hurt your feelings. Seems to be the new idea. But this book, outstanding book, a lot of you have read it, Arthur Koestler's Darkness at Noon. So this is a great book about and totalitarianism, not only communism, written in the 1940s. I don't know if people read it today. I doubt that students read it. I've identified this, I may be wrong, as sort of setting forth kind of the original understanding of political correctness as was articulated by communists in the 1930s. And let me read a little bit here from this passage from Darkness at Noon. So the central character is Rubashov. He's been imprisoned because, though he's a communist, it's said that he's betrayed the party line, and he's being interviewed by a party official while he's in prison, basically awaiting execution. Ivanov is the name of the interviewer. Ivanov paused and poured himself another glass of brandy. Rubashov walked up and down in front of the window, and he said, "Why did you execute Bogrov?" "Why? Because of the submarine question," said Ivanov. "It concerned the problem of tonnage, an old quarrel, the beginnings of which must be familiar to you. Bogrov advocated the construction of submarines of large tonnage and long range of action. The party is in favor of small submarines with a short range. You can build 3 times as many small submarines for your money. Both parties had valid technical arguments. The experts made a big display of technical sketches and formulae. But the actual problem lay in quite a different sphere. Big submarines mean a policy of aggression to further world revolution. Small submarines mean coastal defense, that is self-defense and postponement of world revolution. The latter is the point of view of number 1 and the party. Bogrov had a strong following in the Admiralty and amongst the officers of the old guard. It would not have been enough to put him out of the way. He also had to be discredited. A trial was projected to unmask the partisans of big tonnage as saboteurs and traitors. We had already brought several little engineers to the point of being willing to confess publicly to whatever we liked. But Bogrov would not play the game. He declaimed up to the very end for big tonnage and world revolution. He was 2 decades behind the times. History was against him. He would not understand that the times are against us, that Europe is passing through a period of reaction, that we are in the hollow of a wave and must wait until we are lifted by the next. In a public trial, he would only have created confusion among the people. There is no other way possible than to liquidate him administratively. Would you not have done the same thing in our position? And they continue. In the end, of course, Rubishov is shot, but the point there is that there's one point of view, and even on surface issues, which appear not to be the central point, if you unwind those to the end, you can find that the premises are flawed, and the premises have to be shut off before they can be developed. And this is kind of the idea that animated political correctness as it evolved on the college campus. And when that was not stopped, discouraged, or whatever, it's moved further down the road to microaggressions and to trigger warnings. And if that's not stopped, it will go further still to something else that we cannot imagine. And so it's important to stand up against it. Now, Anne has pointed out some of the things that various colleges have done to stand up against it. I think in this controversy at Yale, I believe the faculty and the president should stand up and forthrightly express their views in defense of that person who's being attacked. And if there are issues to debate, let's debate these issues in an intellectual way. I'm going to quote here once more and final time from a statement approved by the faculty of the University of Chicago very recently on this whole question of free speech. The president appointed a faculty committee to set forth a university position at Chicago on free speech. And it's an excellent statement. I think the students here should reproduce that. Maybe the Buckley program should publish it. It should be published widely and circulated. And what the faculty says is this, in conclusion: as a corollary to the university's commitment to protect and promote free expression, members of the university community must also act in conformity with the principle of free expression. Although members of the university community are free to criticize and contest the views expressed, and to criticize and contest speakers who are invited to campus, they may not obstruct or otherwise interfere with the freedom of others to express their views they reject or even loathe. To this end, the university has a solemn responsibility not only to promote a lively and fearless freedom of debate and deliberation, but also to protect that freedom when others attempt to restrict it. And as Robert Hutchins observed, without a vibrant commitment to free and open inquiry, a university ceases to be a university. The University of Chicago's longstanding commitment to this principle lies at the core of our greatness. This is our inheritance and our promise to the future. Now, various other universities, I think as Anne has mentioned, have adopted the University of Chicago principles. Purdue has done so. Princeton University has done so. Several other universities. I don't see why this should not be a kind of a universal program on college campuses around the country. Now, it's not enough simply to make statements like this. They have to be enforced and taught. And obviously, on our campuses across the country, our teachers, our professors, our administrators have done a very bad job of teaching students about the principles of our Constitution, the First Amendment, and the importance of a robust exchange of ideas, because obviously students aren't getting it. So that is a function of the faculty and the administration to teach these principles and to stand up for them when they're under fire. And sadly, it's needed now more than ever. Thank you.
We have till 4:30, I think, in order to give a few minutes between the panels. And maybe we could just immediately turn this over to questions.
Thank you. I graduated class of 2014, and I think during my experience at Yale, I found a lot of what you said to be true, and that the threat to free speech doesn't come from the institution or from the professors, but rather from the students themselves. It seems to me that there are three types of people that students target, one of which is the institutions, one of which is the professors, and one of which is their fellow students. And a lot has been said about what to do to combat students attacking institutions and their professors, but very little has been said about the issue of students attacking other students, which I think is perhaps the most troubling of the three, seeing as how students come to college at age 18, 19, and don't have prestige and power that the university and professors have behind them.
Yeah, I think that's an absolutely great point. I also just wanted to say for the record, I really did not follow what happened over with the guy who was putting up posters over there, and I've never seen a situation like that for a speech that I gave. Defending freedom of speech, but I guess I shouldn't use strong imagery when I'm defending freedom of speech. So you learn something new, every day. When it comes to the students' lack of tolerance and decision, like they make a decision, essentially, like I'm going to hear something, I'm going to hear it only the way I want to hear it, and this is an opportunity for me to be outraged, and this is an opportunity for me to be the heroic censor. I talked about this as the hero narrative in my book on learning liberty. It's totally abusing what Joseph Campbell meant, but I'm fine with abusing Joseph Campbell. Hopefully I didn't offend anybody with that one. But when it comes to the problems within students, they can't so much be enforced. But I do think that if you had proper Oxford-style debates on college campuses, that could teach people that people who disagree with you are not necessarily stupid or evil. But we can't even have proper Oxford-style debates on college campuses because when different campuses have tried, I was talking about this at Harvard 2 years ago. Actually, two Erica Christakis' students. And a heartbroken student came up to me afterwards and said that I can't do these debates on campus because if we were to do, say, immigration, you'd have to have someone who was not open borders, and they would never stand for that. So every controversial issue they talked about, he's like, no, but nobody would allow us to have someone on the other side of that. It's like,
Or the students on the other side have been so intimidated they wouldn't be willing to stand up and say what they believe.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a hard one to fight, and it's got to start really early. And the problem is K through 12 is educating students in a way that's teaching them the exact opposite. Add to that the completely out of control, and I'm perfectly willing to say that, Department of Education is also making universities afraid they'll get sued if they don't overreact. So there's a lot, this is a big, big fight, people. And in freedom from speech, I gave the most depressing point that I've made at all, for someone who's naturally an optimist. This is an incredibly pessimistic book, to say that I think that it's kind of natural for increasingly affluent societies that can consume whatever media they want and increasingly move to neighborhoods that are politically homogeneous to become less tolerant of people who disagree with them. It's uncomfortable. It's painful. So I think this is a problem that's going to get worse with time unless we figure out coherent ways to fight this very early on.
Would anyone else like to jump in?
Well, I'll just add on the disciplinary diversity aspect of it. I mean, again, we just did a survey of college graduates' understanding of the Constitution, and it was pretty amazing. Many of them thought Judge Judy was on the Supreme Court. Oh. And it does get back, I think, fearfully to the fact that at the K-12 level and at the college level, that many students are allowed to graduate without a firm foundation in the foundations of our country and primary documents, the principles on which we live and which should presumably be uniting documents. I mean, that's the civic glue that should be binding us as a nation, and regrettably, our students are not familiar with those documents. And so I think this gets back again to seeing what it is we're not doing and insisting that we start doing it.
All right. Yes.
Thank you. First, thanks to the panel for the excellent comments. I have a question inspired by Dr. Piereson's reference to Arthur Koestler, and also inspired by a fascinating column last Tuesday in the Wall Street Journal by Bret Stephens discussing the tendency of the left toward apocalyptic thinking. And the question is, how much is this new intolerance perhaps driven in part by the parallel trend of the new and very militant secularism, which is especially common more on the left by far than the right, in that secular ideology or secular thinking tends to go with surrogate ideologies, surrogate faiths, and therefore the folks you're debating with about your ideas are not just interlocutors or discussion partners, but apostates who have to be punished and have to be put down.
James, would you like to?
Well, yes, I agree with that. I think what you're saying, I agree with this, is that a kind of ideological thinking, secular ideological thinking, has taken over large parts of the academy. And since all these pieces are intertwined, you can't raise any one of them, discuss any one of them without bringing the whole structure into view. And since people are reluctant to see that happen, they have to cut it off before it gets started. So, you know, I think that all that's true. That's one of the reasons I mentioned the Arthur Koestler business, because though communism is dead and discredited, I think a form of thinking that it represented lives on.
Yeah. Anyone else like to
And
comment?
I think looking at the residue of postmodernism, I mean, essentially, postmodernism did not view that there was a truth other than power. And I think, again, I mean, we're seeing just another variation of that theme. And so we've been without a real understanding of academic freedom for some time as postmodernism reigned. And this is just simply an unfortunate fact, but I do think that that's what we're suffering from.
And I just wanted to add one point to it. One thing that I do think is notable, particularly in the past couple of years, is if we mean by secularists, we mean atheists, when people who are avowedly atheists, it's been even they are starting to get violate political correctness norms on a regular basis. Whether you're talking about Sam Stein or Richard Dawkins or whatever, they're starting to actually say things like, "This is completely out of control," because it's this weird. It's not like it currently makes a lot of coherent sense what you are and aren't allowed to say on campus. You have to. It's perfectly fine to be incredible to say brutal things about Christianity, but if you say something even mildly critical of Islam, that's considered a big no-no. It really it's a big jumble of incoherent norms, all competing with each other. So even the atheists right now are really worked up.
I just want to put on the record that as a professor of constitutional law and constitutional history, I have absolutely no objection to Judge Judy being on the Supreme Court. I'll get straight to my question, and that is Title IX historically was passed to be used as a shield against discrimination, but now it's being used more and more often as a sword against exercises of speech on campus through proceedings that are tantamount to star chamber inquisitions. What can faculty, administrators, trustees do in order to change this?
The main thing you have to do is a university somewhere in this country has to grow a spine and sue the Department of Education. Because I'm getting tired of having prominent heads of different law schools, prominent heads of different schools who now actually I'm apparently somewhat acceptable to talk to, but I don't know how much longer I will be, saying to me behind closed doors, yeah, this Title IX stuff, the stuff that we're doing, we're trying to adjudicate felonies with a presumption of guilt, essentially. This is nuts. And I'm like, well, will your college challenge the Department of Education? Nope. And there's good reason to be afraid of it. At Tufts, the Tufts actually tried to stand up to the impossible standards of the Department of Education, and they were cowed by them. But a university really they have to sue them directly and fight some of this stuff, because there's so many different problems going on. But the thing that really sends us into overdrive is the fact that universities are being told from on high. I mean, the Department of Education crossed a Rubicon the other day at Mary Washington. They said, you're being investigated now for harassment because you're not censoring Yik Yak, a gossip app that people have. Now, that is obviously saying, we're now saying that you can get in trouble for not stopping First Amendment protected speech. But it's just a natural progression of where they've been heading for a long time. So step one, fight the Department of Education.
I'll add to that. And I think this is a wonderfully interesting story that just happened. The University of Virginia has been under investigation by the Department of Education. And what did it have to do? It resorted to its Democratic governor and its 2 Democratic senators because it could not get a fair shake from Title IX. They were not paying any attention to the facts. They demanded of their elected representatives that they were entitled to due process. So what this underscores for me is that the UVAs, the places of this world, are all realizing that the Title IX is out of control. The enforcement mechanism is out of control, and that they are trampling everyone's rights. So yes, I think suing would be a very good thing, but what we are recommending is that let's take a Tufts, let's take a UVA. There are enough of these aggrieved institutions. They should band together. One doesn't need to do it by itself. Let's have them band together and start to protest, start to sue, and moreover, this is something that we can all do, let's demand that Congress defund the Office of Civil Rights until they actually have a notice and rulemaking. All of this has been done by administrative fiat. And we need to stop that, and so let's go to members of Congress as well and say, we've had enough. UVA has to resort to behind the scenes dealing with its politicians in order to get due process. This is not the American way.
So I have a slightly more pedestrian question and then a proposal. The pedestrian question is simply this. I have a 16-year-old son. Have you decided to publish, or can you tell me the list of schools that have actually taken that pledge? Because I'm afraid of where I'm going to send him and what's going to happen to him. So if you haven't published it on your website, please do.
Yes.
And if you have, direct me to that
It's
website.
unfortunately a short list.
Yeah, I know.
It was originally at Chicago, Purdue adopted it, Princeton adopted it, American adopted a version of it, and I think Chapman adopted it.
And Hopkins has a very strong statement that just came out as well.
Yeah, but every school in the country should adopt it.
Almost
It's
a
amazing how
terrifying
efficient they
answer.
are.
The proposal is related to that, which is, although the pledge that Dr. Piereson read was impressive, I think it's far too complicated. I would propose a much simpler type of pledge. The president of the university needs to stand up and say, trigger warnings are silly, microaggressions are nonsense, please come to my school. And I would sign a petition to ask the president of the two schools of which I am an alum to make that statement if you would promulgate it somewhere. Thanks.
It's funny because I got some flack from the other direction saying that the University of Chicago statement wasn't comprehensive enough. So, damned if you do.
Yeah, I think we have like a minute left.
So this is the William F. Buckley program, and one of his famous activities was firing line. So I'm wondering, we have these meetings of the Yale group, and all the people of like mind show up, and would part of our mission perhaps through this program be to do a firing line type activity here at Yale, and encourage the active debate of key issues in a way that would perhaps broaden the number of people who would consider the different arguments on the key issues.
Well, that's a terrific idea. There is a group in New York called Intelligence Squared.
Yep.
That has mounts outstanding debates, pro and con, important, difficult issues in New York. They want to come to the Yale campus in the spring and do something, Intelligence Squared. I don't exactly know what they've got planned or what debate they want to have. Indeed, whether it would be even possible to do something like this on the Yale campus on a controversial subject. But they're looking at it. It'd definitely be a step in the right direction.
And just to be clear, the Yale debate is actually co-sponsored with FIRE, and it's supposed to be in March if I'm invited back.
If I could just emphasize again that you've got the Woodward report. You've already got a terrific statement.
Yep.
And I know
One of the
this
best.
because we are very lucky to have a Yaley working for us at the American Council of Trustees and Alumni, and he checked, and it is still on the Yale website.
Yep.
So let's take what you've got as a foundational document and insist that the adults here address it and really have an opportunity for an educational engagement with these issues. I mean, Yale could really be a model for the rest of the country if it were willing and courageous enough to embrace it, and it already has a terrific statement to do that.
Thank you very much. It was a great panel, and thank you, audience.